Right. Hi everyone. Welcome to the final session of the day, which is a panel discussion on tools, which is a microcosm of the entire conference. I'm John Pretty. I've been using Scala for over a decade now, and I'm not really sure why I've been chosen to chair this panel, because I'm probably one of the worst users of tools in the Scala community. I've spent 10 years using nothing much other than Vim and make and calling ScalaSphere directly. So hopefully this afternoon I'm going to learn something about tools in Scala.
That's why we're over here and you're over there.
Yeah. So I'm going to be asking this panel a few questions. I'm just going to introduce them first. At the far end is Julian Dragoš, who you met first thing this morning. And Julian's actually been developing Scala longer than anyone else in this room, and indeed in most of the world. I think only Martin has been developing in Scala continuously longer
Continuously,
than you.
yeah, that's the key word, continuously.
Continuously, yes. Yeah, and you could even argue that Martin's been working on Dotty the last couple of years, so you are the single longest standing developer of Scala.
I prefer not to do that.
But a large part of that was you like all the thanks you got for being the longest serving developer of Scala was being condemned to working on the Scala IDE for 4 years. So that's
correct.
That's the thanks you get.
I was actually an IntelliJ user at that point.
Okay, so next to Julian is Sam Halliday. Sam is the benevolent overlord of Enzyme and an authority on licensing, as you found out earlier. And I think most of what Sam says should be prefixed by the acronym IANAL.
Yes.
I am not a lawyer, but that always follows with a but and some advice. And I have to say the words that come out of Sam's mouth in this panel are licensed under the Creative Commons license, which means, according to the license, you can copy and redistribute the material in any medium or format and transform, build upon, and remix the material. So I'm hoping for a Sam Halliday trance remix to be a hit of the summer. Moving in this direction, we have Eugene, who spoke earlier about Scala Meta. Eugene, I think, has, in my opinion, developed the most significant new feature to Scala, or the most radical new feature to Scala in the last 5 years or so, Scala macros. One of the biggest enablers for new and exciting facilities in Scala. And you're now finishing your PhD and working on what will be sort of the next, or Macros 2.0, Scala Meta. And Eugene has a lot of very useful advice on macros. I think my favourite piece of advice is the first rule of Macro Club is don't use macros.
Yeah, I can confirm
that. What's the first rule of Meta Club? Let's work that one out later.
It's too meta for that.
And next to me here is Pavel, who has just given a talk on IntelliJ. At least I think that's what he was talking about. I was out of the room preparing these questions. So if I ask a question that you've already answered in your talk, please stop me and suggest something else to talk about. So Pavel has been you know all this. Pavel's been on the IntelliJ team at JetBrains for quite a while now. You helped implement the first Scala type system developed outside of EPFL. I think that's correct. And that was over the last 7 years. So you started back when you were 12 years old. and the years, I have to say, the years are showing. That's what developing a type system does to you. Eugene said earlier that he didn't have enough time in his life yet to do that. Probably a wise decision. So can we have a round of applause for our panel, please? Now I've got a few questions I've prepared here. I'm going to ask them in no particular order, and generally to no particular panel member in particular. Once I've gone through my questions, and maybe even sooner, I'll open it to the floor. And if anyone has any questions that they want to ask about tooling in Scala that you think the panel will be able to give interesting answers on, I'll invite you to raise your hand and ask the question. So I want to talk first of all about build tools in Scala. Now we have SBT, which has somewhat of a monopoly on building. It's not the only build tool out there, but it's the one that most people use. How do you feel about that? Can I start with Sam, because I know he's got some opinions.
Take this. Well, where do we begin with SBT? I've now started to learn how to use SBT properly, which means I'm in a bit of a privileged position because everyone comes to me and asks me to fix their SBT builds, which is not great. And the problem with SBT is it's exceptionally complicated to use.
Can you put the mic a bit closer?
Oh, sure. The problem with SBT is it's exceptionally difficult to use, and there's a lot of focus going into the DSL. And really, to understand how to use SBT, you have to spend a lot of time learning the internals of SBT. And I really would quite like there to be an alternative. And I think there's a lot of good things in SBT that we could learn from. I mean, for example, it's based on top of a graph computational framework where tasks depend on other tasks. And I think fundamentally that's actually a good model for a build tool. So if somebody is thinking of making a new one, please do take that one on board. But the complexity of SBT and the fact that everybody just copies an SBT file from another project without really thinking about what it is that it's doing just leads to so much spaghetti in everybody's build tool.
Do you think there's actually an advantage in having an entire community and ecosystem using the same build tool?
That's the problem. I mean,
versus
there's an ecosystem of users, but there's no ecosystem of contributors. There are very, very few people actually giving back to SBT. And that's not because people don't want to, it's because people don't know how to use it. And they find it extremely hard to get involved. And it's not because it's a bad community, it's a wonderful community. I mean, Eugene and up until recently, Josh was, they would always be there to help. And there's some people like Dale who are always there to give you very solid advice if you're wanting to contribute to SBT. But fundamentally, everybody is limited in their knowledge of how SBT works, even Eugene, because he picked it up from somebody else.
The other Eugene.
I mean, Eugene. Yokota.
I was actually discussing SBT with Rory and a couple others earlier, and someone quoted that you can be one of the best developers in the world and still not be able to use SBT. And I think Daniel Spiewak was cited as an example of this. Now I don't know anyone who sucks at SBT worse than I do. Does that mean I'm maybe the best developer in the world? I think probably not. Maybe there are people who do suck worse than I do at SBT. Does anyone else want to chime in on their thoughts on SBT and build systems in general or alternatives?
I have a pretty good experience with SBT because I was responsible to implement SBT support, at least initial support in IDEA, and to implement incremental compiler with the SBT, and it's quite complicated, and the problem is probably lies in that it was built to be a command line IDE, so it has everything you need if you use plain text editor. It can define project, which IDEs also do. It can incrementally compile Scala files and also Java files, and it contains compilation server to speed up the compilation. So it's designed for that use case, and it's quite hard to do anything else. So it's hard to integrate it into other tools and so on. And yeah, so it's controversial tool. So maybe if you use IDE, you don't need SBT, and if you use text editor, SBT is actually quite good. And if I don't know, somebody uses Vim and don't consider that hard, so maybe we can learn something from Vim and disable the exit command in SBT, and also that kind of strange shortcut, so people will use SBT more, and and maybe even learn how to do that, and will like it.
So this is a common theme I've heard several people say, which is that there are some good bits of SBT. Sam mentioned the graph, the way of organising tasks into a graph and computing them. The incremental compilation is also another example of something which works pretty well. I mean, it makes compilation a lot far faster, and they're both parts of SBT, but together, SBT brings together a lot of things that the people don't like as well. The DSL is often cited as something people complain about. Now, do you think it would be better for the ecosystem of tools to evolve as a lot of smaller, more lightweight, more composable tools for doing simpler, smaller tasks, or should we go? Should we tend towards the model of the IDE model, where the I in IDE stands for integrated, where we have large pieces of software which do everything in a very integrated is the key word there, a very integrated way. Julian, do you want to say something about this? Because you've worked on a tool for a very specific task, Adept. And probably other tools as well that I've forgotten, but you've also worked on the IDE for Scala.
Right, I worked on IDE for Scala, and maybe you meant Abide.
Sorry,
Adept.
Yes, of course, Abide.
So I don't necessarily want to join the discussion about SBT, but since you asked me directly, I do believe that you'd want to have smaller tools that can be integrated, but basically composable tools that you can use if you want from an IDE or from Emacs or from the command line. I think that because you mentioned Abide, that was the idea of having a code checker. So it's very similar to inspections in IntelliJ, but that runs as part of your build and hopefully integrated with the IDE. Now, unfortunately, that project didn't go so well. Not technically, but simply we didn't have enough contributors, and there were so many other things we had to focus on. So it's still there, and it's still waiting for someone to pick it up. But going to the matter of build tools and tools in general, I think the problem is there are very few people who can dedicate the time to take a tool to a mature stage where you can use it. I was very hopeful when I saw a talk at Scala Days in Berlin last year about a new Scala build tool, but it was such an incipient tool that it was completely uninteresting. In fact, I mean, it didn't do much, and nothing came later. So I guess
which tool was this? Which build tool?
I don't even know how it was called. It was done by Christos Laverdos.
Yet another build tool.
Yet another build tool. Yeah, thank you.
Is that Yabt?
Yeah, I guess. So yeah, that's the problem with tools. They take time and they take energy, and so far I don't think any tool in the Scala ecosystem was purely an open source volunteer type of tool. The IDE, both IDEs are basically financed by a company. For Eclipse it's TypeSafe, for IntelliJ it's JetBrains. SBT was again TypeSafe, still is. So yeah. Sorry?
Ammonite.
Ammonite, yeah. Let's see where that goes. Yeah.
So this raises another question. If you're developing tools, is the task of marketing them too great? Is it because software developers aren't always necessarily the best people at marketing? You might even say that we're worse than average. But but is it a problem that in order for your tool to be successful, you need to have alongside the technical technical expertise, you need to be able to promote it.
Okay, I'll answer this and then I'll pass the mic. I don't think it's the case. I mean, the yet another build tool talk was a standing room. People want something. They will definitely find out about it. Right now, there's not a lot of competition in the tool space for Scala. Maybe it's different for Java, but I'm sure that if you tomorrow write a build tool and you just tweet, you'll get users.
If I write a build tool tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that.
So we can hack together.
I have more to say on that actually, because you're absolutely right. The community around a build tool and the momentum that you need for people to use it is probably more important than the technical problem that you're solving. Myself and Rory worked on a project which had its own build tool. They built their own build tool and they released it on GitHub. And despite the fact that it was possibly easier to use, it never got any users outside of that one project, even though people seen it, because they were always scared. I mean, I'll be left using a build tool where there are no other users out there.
Yeah.
And it had no documentation.
And it had
on
no
a single
documentation.
piece.
It had no ecosystem.
But I wonder whether even if it did have documentation, the situation would be the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was still easier to use and to modify than SBT because it was more of a standard idiomatic Scala way of writing things. But you know, without that community, it's nothing. And I'm not using it today.
So I don't know if many people here know the English phrase, it's the devil you know. SBT is the devil you're familiar with. It's not the devil you don't know that might be better.
And it's the tooling around it. The thing is, SBT on its own may not be that clever, but all the plugins, you know, the native packager.
Yeah. So
release
just to repeat what Rory said there, SBT has a lot of support already. It's got tools and plugins, and there's an ecosystem around SBT. And for another build tool to come along and replace that, it's a massive challenge. And maybe to answer my own question, maybe if you were planning on replacing SBT, the only way to do it would be to have marketing as well as technical expertise. But that may not be true with other tools in the ecosystem.
We also add 5 cents for SBT defense. So yes, SBT can be complicated and so on. So we have rants about SBT, but I suppose that SBT did a great job overall, and it's trying to modularize its functionality today. So for example, now we have an incremental compiler in Maven and in Gradle, and that's cool, and that's because of SBT. It's SBT compiler there, and I suppose it's a useful project anyway, and there is a lot of good.
So still, yeah, I mean, the situation with SBT strikes me very similar to the situation with macros. You can think, oh, what the hell is he talking about? Because he probably thinks about macros and just like that. But actually, last year when I was at Scala Exchange in London, there was a lightning talk. So a guy he presented his macro that did some stuff. So the what exactly the macro did is not that important, but what was fun is the style how he described the development of the code. He said, okay, well, I wrote this, and then I went to Stack Overflow, copy pasted this a bit, and then it doesn't. I don't know how it works, but see, it works. And well, it was quite striking, to be honest. So I think a lot has to be learned from experiences of these two similar projects. How do we make if we unleash a powerful technology onto the world, and as Pavel brought up, the functionality is indeed great. So Scala does need an incremental compiler because of different reasons, and it's quite a complicated undertaking. But how do we build a simple to use UI, and what does simple to use mean? It's amazing. So personally, for me, I know this firsthand. I just go ahead and copy paste other people's configs. And well, now I've reached the stage when people copy paste my configs that I copy pasted from someone else. But is that really a good model for code reuse? Yeah, I don't know.
Well, we should also ask Sam the question, what was the license under which the original configuration was?
You jest, but I recently put all of the bits that are common to all my SPT configs into one file, and I've licensed them under Apache too.
Right. So while Eugene's still got the mic, well, I want to ask this question to Eugene because I think Scala Meta is probably going to be one of the biggest enablers of new tooling in the Scala ecosystem. What do you think are the main areas where we're lacking in tooling? I think we all admit we're a little bit behind many other languages, maybe most other languages. But which are the most important things that we can we can improve on?
I think what comes to my mind first, not necessarily that's the most important, but still. Well, I've been lucky to attend several compiler technology summits at Google in Munich, and what amazed me every time is the demos of the Clang toolchain. So what the guys do in order to analyze C code, in order to emit sane error messages in the face of macros, well, not the macros that we have, mind you, but the really evil, crazy macros. That's very impressive. And based on the toolchain that essentially they were forced to do their, C.meta, however you call it, because otherwise they just wouldn't survive. But as a result, now they can use this infrastructure to build automatic rewriting tools, and I think this is quite impressive that there are things like Clang format that you can use to reformat your C code, and there's an infrastructure around it. I think that there was a talk at the LLM developer meetup last year that showcases the tree manipulation API and how one can use it to do code rewritings. Of course, without breaking formatting comments and things like that. So I think this is the area that we as a community would profit from. Imagine how cool it would be if we could have automatic migrations from all the versions of libraries to new ones, or from Scala, I don't know, 2.14 to 2.15, however it is. But of course, for that we need a solid infrastructural background. And well, as John mentioned, Scala Meta may very well be the answer here.
Scala Meta in combination with Tasty.
Yeah.
Does anyone else on the panel have thoughts on which areas are particularly lacking in Scala tooling? Or is everything going completely swimmingly?
Well, the presentation compiler, which we sing today, is definitely the worst bit, and I have high hopes that the Scala Meta is going to address a lot of the problems there. That would probably be the number.
So another enabler for tools to interact with the compiler more easily.
Because if you've got access to the typer and the AST, then you can do things like something we could do is, I know IntelliJ has its set of intentions and so on for Scala, but something we could do between Eclipse Scala ID and Enzyme is have a shared repository of potential refactorings based on top of Scala Meta. And at that point in time, maybe IntelliJ could join in, and we could have a community-owned database or repository of refactorings that you could even apply as part of your build, rather than even something you run in the IDE. So somebody who's maybe in charge of code cleanliness could run it as an automated test. I think that would be very useful, especially as projects get larger, the ability to do that sort of refactoring automatically.
Okay, can I ask Pavel now?
I can
go ahead.
something to add. And basically, I think we need to go deeper. So we are building layer upon layer of different tools and technologies, but we can simplify. So, for example, we can learn something from Kotlin. And Kotlin had a luxury of hindsight, so it learned all the Scala errors, and now they implemented all the model in such a way that they reuses the same model in compiler and in IDE, and not only in IDE, but also in Eclipse. and any other IDE, which is obviously the right thing to do. And I suppose it's hard to do the same for Scala now, because you have many things already built, and it's a political issue maybe.
But perhaps it would be easier for Dotty.
Maybe. But
That remains to be seen.
But if you do something like that, it will be extremely easy to implement anything, because we don't need some converters, and we personally in JetBrains don't have to re-implement a Scala compiler and so on. And,
So on that point, you made the decision 7 or 8 years ago that that's what you would do. That you would take the approach of redeveloping a significant, maybe the most significant part of the Scala compiler, in order to provide a better IDE for Scala developers. Can you elaborate a bit on why that decision was made, and whether now you think it was the right choice?
yes, there is a substantial reason for doing that, and that's because we are standing on the shoulders of a giant, and in this case it's IDEA platform. It's now 16 years old, and it's very robust and very efficient and time proven. So we have everything we need already, but we need to play by IDEA rules to be able to get all this cool stuff. So if we try to use the presentation compiler, even the name implies that something is wrong, because we need to present presentation, but not compile presentation. We need to compile classes and present presentation. So it runs in a different thread. So it's basically really a part of compiler which is run as a server inside the application. So it's quite hard to tie together IDE, API, and presentation compiler. If you have only a text editor, that's fine. You always gain from doing that. But if you have already almost everything, because IDEA has incremental compiler, which we still use instead of SBT. IDEA have basically anything. It has code coverage out of the box. So we are trying to leverage that features.
So it's been a significant benefit to have everything.
Yes, but we are aware that there is a drawback in re-implementing the compilers. That's obviously very hard to do. Right.
So I have a quick question. So you're advocating an integrated solution, and what if we did like Dotty is a very promising and emergent technology. So what if we theoretically built this wealth of functionality inside the Dotty compiler? So what would happen? I guess this sounds promising, but on the other hand, I have a question to you. So as you said yourself, the IntelliJ platform is very mature. It's like 16 years, and it's hard to imagine how many years went into that, because the company is quite sizable. So now the question is it really humanly possible to do something like that for a Scala compiler?
I suppose we need to distinguish what we really need to implement. We only need to implement the basic interface. And in particular, I suppose we need to implement the concrete tree instead of abstract syntax tree. And so that compiler will provide the tree, and IDE will be able to use it. So it just needs to be connected to any IDE. And that's all. So it's the need to implement everything in IDE.
Well, so if we have this CST model or whatever, maybe in Scala Meta, maybe somewhere else, it's not the point. But the thing is, what's more valuable and what takes more time? Just exposing these data structures, I mean, it can take several years to figure this out. Or the infrastructure that caches the stuff, the infrastructure that does indexing. Well, if we ask Sam, for instance, what he does to speed up indexing of Scala projects, because the presentation compiler does not do this, he probably can share a few very interesting stories with us.
So tell us about Enzyme.
Well, the way Enzyme works is we try to minimize our interaction with the presentation compiler as much as possible, and that's the only way we can get anything useful out of it. And we try to rely on binaries as much as possible. So probably where Enzyme breaks down is when you forget to compile your project regularly. Because if you're working in a huge project, we'll be able to read that, that's fine. But if you've just made some breaking changes in your project and then you've cleaned the entire output directory, the presentation compiler only sees the files that you've got open right now. And we don't open your whole project, because that would require effectively a very slow recompile of it. Yeah, so we do break down there. And we're using Lucene and databases in the back ends. We're hopefully going to use a graph database to store all of this stuff so that we can minimize which files we load in the presentation compiler, relying on the binary information, which is as close to what you were talking about in terms of the AST being written out by the compiler. The compiler does write out a lot of type information that you can get from the class files, but it doesn't give you all that positional information that we all need. That's where we use the presentation compiler. So yeah, we could just throw away the presentation compiler if the tasty format was actually more detailed.
Well, tasty I think will be. It just doesn't exist yet.
Well, the thing is, Tasty's not going to work. Tasty's only really going to work for things that compile. The presentation compiler also has to work for things that don't compile, and that's where Tasty falls slightly short of it all. So we're still going to need something that's kind of able to handle a broken source file, or even an entire broken project, which I find myself in quite a lot when I'm doing refactoring. So it's just the way of life.
Right, and many people's, I'm sure.
So I think what we really need is reusable components. I mean, your example with the Clang toolset, I think that's exactly what we need. So you need some components that you can reuse to build the tools you need on top of Scala. Right now we have probably two major implementations. There's the IntelliJ platform, and there's the Scala presentation compiler with some duplication between Enzyme and Eclipse IDE. But there is no common, real library for working on Scala, on Scala compiler or trees and so on. So Scala Meta might be that, hopefully very soon. But I don't have really high hopes that Dotty will fill that gap, because I don't think that's part of the design goal, at least not at this point. Maybe in a year, maybe it's not too late. So yeah, maybe and I already this morning I had a couple of tools that I said would be very beneficial to the community. So one of them was code analysis, and the other one was, I think the more daring one was a second implementation of the Scala compiler, which would be a completely different one. So I'm still hoping that will happen at some point. I don't think it will happen very soon though. And maybe that could, from the get-go, take the Kotlin approach and design for being a platform that others can use. But I think in the meantime, Scala Meta can be that library that will just bridge with different, dialects.
So sticking with the topic of IDEs, but moving away from the current situation, looking to the future, what do you think are going to be the most important and exciting developments in the IDE space over the next few years? And in particular, do you think we'll start to see cloud-based IDEs?
My personal opinion, I expressed it this morning as well. I don't see yet the sweet spot. I don't see yet what they will bring that will make us all switch. I see it very good for teaching. So I think learning and sort of no hassle, zero setup environment that you can get. And I see it as a nice way to do code reviews as well. So that would be a web-based IDE for code reviews. I think that there's something that could be done there very nicely. To move all our workspaces in the cloud, I don't see it happening in the next few years, but I could be wrong very well. Because
do you not think in particular for Scala, if say a service company could hire or buy some very fast compilation equipment, faster than the typical laptop, you could actually get faster compilation through using a cloud service than you would on your personal development machine?
Well, I mean, if you made the Scala compiler or type checker run on multiple cores, maybe, but I don't think that processors are getting much faster these days. So
maybe they're not, but they are. But the difference in speed between a typical laptop processor and an expensive mains-powered hardware server processor is, I think.
Yeah, I mean, but that would be for the wrong reason. I mean, if we move our IDEs to the cloud, it should be for some clear benefit in our day-to-day work, not because we can't afford or the Scala compiler is too slow, or we can't afford a huge machine to run it. I'd prefer to fix the compiler and then.
You sure? Do you want to do that?
I definitely want to. I don't know if I can.
I'm not really sure we have the luxury of choosing how we fix the compilation speed problem. Rory.
I think Sam and I actually had this at one of our previous jobs, which is we had stupidly powerful machines, and yet with like 16 cores and insane things, and it was still a singly threaded compilation. It didn't matter how much power you threw at it, it was one core.
So the point Rory's making is that however fast your equipment is, the compiler by its very design runs on a single core or single thread, or I think at most three threads at certain points in the.
Well, I mean, you have the Java virtual machine uses some threads for just-in-time compilation and for garbage collection, so you get that.
I've never seen more than three active cores on my laptop when compiling the Scala.
I'd just like to add that there is a simple solution which can achieve you the parallel compilation. Just split your project into several modules and compile them in parallel, so it's quite simple.
No, actually that's slower, and I'll tell you why. SBT. Because every single module then involves a new IV resolution phase, which is slower than the compiler for most projects. So actually, the very design and the performance of the IV resolution SBT is making people create larger and larger and larger modules. It's against the modularization design. That's what I've seen.
IP resolution is done once.
It claims it is. I have evidence to the contrary.
I actually suggested to do that in IntelliJ IDEA. It can compile in parallel, and it has an incremental compiler that is probably faster than SBT, although I don't need nowadays.
Right, we've got about 5 minutes left. Would the audience like to ask any questions to the panel? And if you could, Simon, could you just grab the microphone and ask a question?
So, what do you think? Would it be possible to improve user experience by combining and bundling a lot of things which you already have? So, for instance, one thing is like SBT bootstrap speed, which is like extremely long because it downloads 50 jar files. Or does it really buy us anything that we don't ship IDE support in SBT by default? Or does it buy us anything that we distribute the Scala distribution on our website, which is not a thing any professional user actually uses? And so on, what do you think?
Who would you like to answer that?
Random.
Well, I'll try to come with something up because it will be boring otherwise. So it's hard to say what's going to work for the Scala community, but there's an experience of the Haskell platform that we could probably look at. So from what I understand, last year I had a chat with Edward Kmet, who is involved in maintenance of the infrastructure. And from what I understand, they have multiple approaches to that. So first of all, you can use the bare-bone distribution that doesn't include any batteries, except for the libraries that are necessary to compile the compiler. Think Scala library, things like integers and strings. Well, the Scala compiler itself uses them, so we have to bundle them. Absolutely have to. But also they have this thing called Haskell platform, which is essentially a curated list of libraries. I think there are several dozen of them, which is one of the ways to get Haskell. So you can download the platform using your package manager or from the website, and there you get some basic functionality that you may probably use. But then if we decide to adopt this model, then who curates this list, and how people decide what goes there, and also if the same domain is serviced by several different open source libraries, say JSON parsers, right? Because we had our JSON gate, so to speak. So what happens to that? So it's a hard question. That's why I can understand why no one wanted to pick the mic, but I think there is some positive experience to be gained just from learning from other communities.
I think one of the criticisms of Scala from certain camps has been that the standard library is too big. It has too much stuff in it. Whilst at the same time other people are complaining that there isn't a standard JSON parser and there aren't other standard things that you would expect to find in a language when you download it and try to run it. And the question is how do you reconcile these two things? And as Yuji mentioned, there have been discussions as to whether having a sort of Scala core, which is the very bare bones compiler and minimal standard library, alongside a more complete platform would be a better solution. Does anyone have any opinions on that? Who would want to use a sort of empty Scala core and choose all their own dependencies? Votes for that idea? So 4 or 5. And who would prefer to download Scala off the shelf and already have most of those dependencies there, ready to use? Slightly more. Not many people put their hands up. So I think a lot of people aren't sure what the right answer is.
Are these things mutually exclusive, though?
Well, the idea is that both would be available.
Right.
Now, whether any single user would have the platform, as in the complete version with the large standard library, as well as the core, I don't know. Some people may do, and it does open the possibility that other groups, such as Type Level, might produce their own distribution of Scala, starting with a Scala core and providing their own standard library with things like cats and shapeless, pre-packaged and ready and self-consistent. Simon, did you want to?
Well, I would agree, and I would argue that that it doesn't have to be either or. It's like if we provided the SBT download by default, everybody can have exactly the size of Scala he or she wants. It's like if just provide SBT instead of having like different distributions which are too small for some people and too large for other people. And
so would we? Well, first of all, we're sort of assuming everybody uses SBT in the future, even though I think some of us have expressed a desire for more diversity in the build tool space, but certainly other build tools could do that. So you think that adding a dependency either to Scala core, as in the very basic compiler, or some other dependency with a different name, which would include all these dependencies as well, would be a better way of framing the solution? Did that make sense? The mic's going somewhere else.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I really love SBT, and the way I use SBT is that I never use the DSL. I just have a build in Scala.
So you use the build.scala way of defining builds.
Yeah, exactly. And what I really like is the modularity. So you can run SBT with a different version of Scala than the version you're compiling your code. And what I think might be, in my opinion, a good solution would be to have an SBT, which would be a Scala programmable build tool, and then have a curated set of sort of build files that would contain lists of components that would combine those distributions, if you like. So if you want to use something standard, okay. If you want to tweak it, it will be tweakable to your liking.
Okay, thank you. And in particular, thank you for supporting SBT. As I think the people at the front haven't really been quite as enthusiastic about it. There's a question or two questions over here.
Okay, but we criticize SBT, but no one said that SBT like inside are wrong. I mean, it's like slow or something. We only criticize the DSL. I mean,
The DSL and the time it takes to do resolution, I think, was criticised.
yes, I agree with resolution. Resolution is terrible. But this is Ivy. This is the different part. I mean about DSL, because resolution can be done once and then you can like work and dependency don't change that much. I think the DSL is the problem because it's hard to like get it started. So my question is, do you think that keeping SBT as a backbone and using different like user interface, or I don't know, different way to define SBT builds, because SBT in the general is a pair of settings. I mean, there's a settings and there is a values.
So could we have a build tool which uses SBT as a library?
Yes.
A DSL over a DSL.
Or a meta build tool maybe. Did the panel have anything to say on?
I can respond.
Yeah. I'll make sure you get your question in a second.
Yeah, I can sort of see where you're coming from. I actually agree with the previous point of using the .scala version of SBT. I find the more DSLs that are added on top of SBT, the more complicated it gets. And there's already macros and stuff in there, and they confused me for years on what they were actually doing. It wasn't until a couple of months ago that I really understood how the graph works in SBT, and once I got it, things finally clicked and it made sense. But I absolutely prefer the .scala versions of things. And I actually love using SBT. The thing that drives me crazy about SBT is trying to change it for any of my projects. What feels like it should be a 5-minute job turns out to be a two-day job or a full week lost, and it ends up being it can be just 3 lines of code at the end of it. I'm getting better at it, but a lot of people don't have the expertise at hacking in their SBT file. But maybe if there's a different front end, that could help things. But actually, to address the Ivy point, that's what I really wanted to say. I mean, Ivy within SBT is terrible, but we're going to have a talk tomorrow from Alexandra on Core CA, and I have high hopes that that's just going to fix that problem completely. I'm really, really looking forward to that.
Okay, that's set high hopes. We've got time for one more question, and it was. Oh, sorry, Carl.
Can I clarify? And we already almost have meta SBT, so it's called SBT server. It's an attempt to define a new API for SBT, so we can use it in IDEs and in different other places. And we are actually communicating with people who develop SBT servers, so maybe there's some hope that we will have those meta features.
So I think this is exactly what you were asking for. So last question to the panel.
Thanks, Sam. It was a nice introduction to my question, because I started out with SBT as well, not really comprehending it, but the most recent changes to SBT, introducing auto plugins and removing the weird constraint for always new lines between the settings, gave a really good user experience for new users to SBT. I'm the SBT guy in my company as well. But since we started using auto plugins instead of build.scalas and using the DSL just for really settings like the name of the service is this, people started to grab SBT, and the user experience really improved a lot in my opinion. And I just wanted to ask, what's your opinion on the most recent changes, auto plugins, and your experiences with it?
Yeah, auto plugins are pretty good. It can still be complicated though, because the rules of what gets evaluated when are still a little bit ill-defined, and you can still get yourself into problems. But for small projects and for people coming on wanting to do simple things, things have got a lot better in SBT nowadays. You only get really hit by the pain whenever you're doing some non-standard things, or you've got a bigger project, or if you want to run a plugin. That's whenever it starts to get more complex. But yeah, I quite like auto plugins. I really wish that they bumped the version of SBT whenever they introduced them, because they did it in like 0.13.4 or something like that, and it just broke everything. So now, with all the plugins I've written, I have to say you have to be using 0.13.5 or later. And it would have been nice if they just went to 0.14.
I think they just like the number 13.
Yeah.
For some reason. We don't have time for any more questions, so I'm going to ask you to thank the panel again. Julian Dragos, Sam Halliday, Eugene Bamarco, and Pavel Fatin. I think I'll hand over, if Sam, you could hand over to Rafael now.
Yes, thank you. And to the...
I think it was on just now.
I turned it off.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay. It's getting
Okay. It is. So yes, thank you. And the panel has been led by John Pretty. So. Thank you everyone. It's been a long day, very long day, and tomorrow is the second day, so everyone is invited for 9:30